Just what the internet really needs. Another guy making a table out of a big slab. But if you've seen the thumbnail, you've already seen it. This guy is going to go right in the center, like a racing stripe on a car. It might be a relatively controversial table because the live edges are going away, the walnut is getting put in the middle, and there's going to be a lot of bow ties on the top. So what you're looking at here is the very top. I'll need to cut the live edge off as symmetrical as possible. Just looking at the grain, I'll have to figure out the best line so that way the grain all looks relatively straight and yield the biggest width out of this that I can get. First, I'll need to square this off because as you can see, it's going to kind of take this line right here. So I'll need to get rid of some of this just so it's easier for me to get a straight line. There's already a lot going on with the figure and the walnut and the bow ties. I think having live edges is just going to be over the top, and that's my excuse for cutting off the live edges. As Mother used to say, this will hurt me more than it will hurt you. Well, we've got those live edges cut off, and I think this might be where it hurts the most, is cutting it right down the middle. So I've got everything pretty parallel visually with all the grain, so I'm not concerned about that. I've got this end squared off. This end is still long and rough. I'm gonna cut the length from this side. So the whole table is gonna be 9 feet long. I'll just measure from down there over 9 feet, which will be right in here. Well, on the plus side, they're a lot lighter to move around now. I will get that luxury for about 1 hour, and then I'm going to glue that walnut piece in, and then it'll be back to being heavier than it was before. All right, now I'm going to rip this piece of walnut down. Alright, so I've got all the pieces cut, and the seams are looking good. I think enough clamping pressure would get them to close up really nice. Some areas, like down here, for one reason or the other, maybe when I shifted my track saw down because it wasn't long enough, I maybe got off a little bit, so there's some areas like this showing. I'm gonna try to take my track saw and cut right along this line, cutting both of these boards at the same time. I've done it on my table saw before, but I've never tried it with my track saw. I assume it's gonna be about the same. So I'm just gonna try to clean up these seams and then see how close we are. So I forgot to film the actual act of cutting. The same thing, you can see it is closed up really nice now, so once clamps are on that, that's going to be pretty much invisible. Hopefully I didn't jinx myself, but I think that is going to go together really, really well. So I got all of the biscuits in. I'm really happy with the alignment. I did not record the glue up because if you've ever done one like this, if you've ever done one this size, it's a little bit stressful, and I just totally forgot to record because I started putting the glue on. I looked at my camera and I just said, forget it. I'm already elbows deep in glue. So it was a race against the clock to get these all glued up and then clamped I've double stick taped these scrap pieces of walnut to the ends because it's already getting really close to the finished width, and I didn't want the clamps to damage the edge, so that way I don't have to cut that off again. Well, I'm going to leave this in the clamps for a day or so, and then I'll come back and sand it, get all the seams nice and flush, which they already are pretty much. All right, everything is out of clamps now. At this point, usually I would sand it all to 80 grit and then do my different fills, but I'm gonna go and do that now so that way I can just hit it all at once after all the fills are dried. When I say fills, I mean like the epoxy and, you know, CA glue. I really need to seal this with something because if I put black epoxy here, it's gonna soak into all of this figured grain and I will probably never be able to sand it out. So you'll just see black splotches all over if I don't try to seal this with something first. So you're really about to see a sneak preview of what the finish will look like when it's all done. I'll just hit the outsides so that it doesn't want to stain any of these surrounding areas. So you can already see a little bit this area is already soaking in, and I just rolled this 10 seconds ago. If I did a thin pour of epoxy on that, the epoxy would absorb way too much and I would never be able to sand it out. But the shellac doesn't absorb too much and this will sand right out. If it catches the light just right, you can really see what I'm referring to that I need to fill with epoxy. There's these cracks here, there's this one here, and then there's some holes here that need to be filled with epoxy. Let me see how many times I can say epoxy. So I've got my syringe filled up. Now I can just sort of go back and forth in these areas and just really place it where I want to and hopefully not make a huge mess. I may have overestimated just a hair how much epoxy I would need. I'm still topping all these deeper spots off that are soaking in, but I'm going to use the majority of it to go through the pieces for the legs. And any areas like this or that knot there, I'm gonna go ahead and fill those up so I don't waste that whole cup of epoxy. I may have spoke a hair too soon about the wasting epoxy. I just looked over and I felt the cup and it was already completely solid. So, you live and you learn. All right, so the epoxy has had time to dry. It is completely cured now. So I'm going to remove most of the excess with the router. I've got these two blocks underneath that will hold the router off the table, and then I will plunge the router bit down until it is hovering just above the surface of the table. Not all the way to the table, because if there's any sort of variation, the router will sort of dig in and leave lines. So I just want to remove the bulk of it and then sand the rest off. So, as you can see, I've knocked the majority of it off, and then I will just sand the rest. I'll show you on this section here how easy this shellac sands off, and it does a really good job at protecting the wood from getting stained by all of that black dye in the epoxy. I've already sanded over here and got all the epoxy off, and there's no staining or anything. That's just the different colors in the wood. So just a few more seconds of doing that and all of that shellac will be completely gone, and then my patch will be left. So I have been doing a lot of sanding, and it's probably been 3 or 4 days since putting in the bow ties since that last clip in the video. So at this point we are ready to start putting the finish on. I'll be using Rubio Monocoat for that, and then when that is all cured I'll be putting a ceramic coating over top of it. I've already sanded and I've already coated the underside with the Rubio, if you can tell. But we will finally see all this nice figured wood. We'll finally see it all highlighted with the finish. All right, we've got 1 coat of Rubio on the table. It's going to get 2, and then a ceramic coating. All of these pieces are going to make up the table base, and it's going to have a, I guess you'd call it a metal skeleton within the wood. The thought behind the metal structure with the wood wrapped around it is to hopefully give it some more strength and rigidity. So it will have a welded steel structure, and then these will be faux post and faux aprons that will just wrap around the metal. I don't have a great way to describe it to you because I don't completely understand it yet myself, but I'm going to start by making 4 legs. They'll be 29¼ inches tall, so I can glue up 4 boards, all mitered on 4 corners, and then I can just cut the lengths that I need out of the longer sections that I glued up. So I've got all these pieces cut to 60 inches, and now I'm just going to start ripping the miters on both sides. So I've got the miter cut on all of these pieces, and then this will just fold up 4 times into a post. I'm just going down and looking at all the edges, making sure that I don't see any sort of gaps. And then if I do, I'm just adding an additional layer of tape there and really pulling down on it so that it closes the gap. So I've got my legs all out of the tape and I'm ready to start cutting them down to length. I was trying to sort out the best way to do that, and I think it's going to be to take my track saw and just go around all 4 sides. This will be quite a bit more cutting than just, chopping it to length. But like I said, I don't really trust that miter saw to do a great job at getting this square the first time. So I'm going to do it with the track saw. I think that is going to work out perfectly because there's not even a mark anywhere where I could have stopped and started. It's just perfect all the way around. Well, I don't love how long it took, but I cannot argue with the results. Alright, I've got my post made up and cut to length. I've went around and orientated them in the way I want them facing, so green arrow pointing towards the inside of the table. And then I've also went around and marked out where I need to cut a slot, which is right here and on the other side, and it's the same on every post. That's where the metal skeleton is going to slide down into, and my aprons, which I have cut up over there, those are going to butt into here, and then it's going to surround the metal. So in a perfect world, once the metal gets here, it will just slide right down into these and be the perfect spacing all the way around. So if these are my side pieces, this will butt into the table like this. It'll be about a 1/2 inch reveal, and then I will have to remove where I've marked out. I'll have to remove that material so that the metal can pass through and then continue all the way around. There we go. Nice and clean. All right, I've got all these notches cut out in all 4 of the posts, and they are looking really good. They don't need any sanding or anything. They're just already ready to go. So I've got all these posts sanded, and I've got all the apron pieces sanded. While they're still separate pieces, I want to go ahead and put 1 coat of finish on them, and then I will assemble it all together, and then I will do my final coat of finish, and then we will see how the metal base is here. Forgot to mention that. So essentially I'm building this wood frame around this metal base. So after my first coat of finish is on, I'll put all the wood pieces together, and then I will put the metal base into the wood structure and see how it all works, and then fasten those together, and I guess we'll see how it looks from there. All right, I've got the aprons all screwed into the post, and I've got the metal framework lowered down into place. So you can kind of get the vision now of what I was trying to explain earlier. The top will attach by these metal tabs here, and I'm going to add a piece of wood right along here on the inside or all the way around. And then I'll use a self-tapping screw into the metal to lock the metal into place so that doesn't shift around. And I think that's going to be very solid. Maybe a classic case of overbuilt, but I'd rather have it overbuilt than underbuilt. So I went around and added those inside apron pieces. I've glued those on to the apron that is underneath. So those are glued on and screwed into the post. And then I have recessed a little hole here for a self-tapping screw. And then those screws go through the wood and into the metal. That locks the metal frame into place within the wood frame. So I centered the metal frame as best as I could within the wood. And then these I have screwed to the top of my post because I don't know if it was my floor or the wood base or the metal base or all 3. They were giving me trouble when I was trying to line up the tops of all these tabs with the top of the wood. So I screwed these down, and that made sure that everything was nice and flush across the top. And then on the sides here, I just made sure that my square went across and that these weren't sticking up too tall.